The bump to $15 would not happen all at once. Amendment 2 calls for raising the wage to $10 per hour beginning on September 30th next year. It would then increase by $1 a year to 2026.
And to help us better understand Amendment 2, including the arguments for and against, we begin this evening with the debate. Joining us are Eric Clinton. He's the president of Unite Here, Local 737, the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union, arguing for Amendment 2. And Bill Hurley, the Florida State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business, or NFIB, arguing against the measure. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Mr. Clinton, let's talk about Florida's minimum wage as it is right now. For non-tipped workers, it's $8.56 an hour in Florida, which, if my math is right, is somewhere around $17,800 a year. It would go up to about $31,000 a year with a $15 minimum wage. Talk to me, first of all, especially in our hospitality and service industry jobs. How difficult is it for people to get by on that $8.56 an hour right now? Are they working a couple of different jobs?
Yeah, people don't get by on $8.56 an hour. They have to work multiple jobs. They also have to rely on government assistance. And that's something that we all should remember, is that if we're going to pay workers poverty wages and they're going to live below the poverty line, taxpayers, through a number of different ways, will subsidize those wages that corporations are paying.
And do you know people personally who are saying, this has got to pass, it's got to pass, or I don't know how I'm going to support my family?
Well, yeah, this is, look, for the members of the union at Disney, we passed the same thing 2 years ago when we fought in our contract negotiations for a pathway to 15. And now those same workers are telling their neighbors and their friends and their families who work in other hospitality jobs outside of Disney that they need to vote for this as well. Florida workers need a raise. There's just no way about it. It's just time to do this.
Mr. Hurley, most businesses are small businesses. Will those business owners be able to afford a steadily increased minimum wage up to $15?
No. And the members of the National Federation of Independent Business are adamantly opposed to the amendment that would establish a $15 minimum wage in November.
And staying with Mr. Hurley, a study by the Economic Policy Institute says even if $15 is not considered a living wage. Isn't it true that if people make more, they will actually spend more, making up for the additional salaries business owners would pay workers?
Sure, but the money has to begin somewhere. We're all for circulating money through the economy, but this has been an extremely difficult year for small businesses. We don't need to state the obvious. Through the COVID shutdowns, we still have about 20% of businesses, small independent businesses out there that are just on the cusp. 20% of small businesses don't think they might not be around, think they may not be around in another 6 months. So this is an economic disruption to them and a huge additional cost that they're asking the voters to stand by small business, stand by the small businesses of Florida, and vote Amendment 2 down.
The argument from the business industry is that if you raise the wage, then they have to lay off people because they can't afford it. What do you say to that?
Well, look, I don't believe that that's the case in places that have passed it. And I'm not just talking about places like California or Washington State. I'm talking about places like Missouri or Arkansas or Arizona, who have also passed minimum wage laws that have increased it in a phased-in way. We're not and by the way, this amendment doesn't take people to 15 tomorrow. It is a slow, phased-in approach between now and 2026. Businesses will have plenty of time to plan and make adjustments as needed.
Mr. Clinton, local governments can be affected by this. As you know, there was a financial impact study done on Amendment 2, and if it passes, it will cost about $540 million a year by 2027, with most of the added costs being dropped on schools. And that could put people out of work. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think it will put people out of work at all. I think it will put more money back into the economy. And this is like, look, it comes from one place or the other. People below the poverty line, which MIT says is $16.14 per hour. That is for two incomes with two children. If you're below that, you're drawing on the government in some other way, whether it's food stamps. There are all different Medicaid, Medicare. There are all different social government programs that as taxpayers, we're all contributing to that pot, and then therefore big corporations are paying workers poverty wages and taking the benefit of that.
Mr. Hurley, $540 million a year would be less than 1% of the state budget. Wouldn't that be justified to generate more spending by service industry workers and more home buying, generation of more sales tax revenues?
Well, I don't know about the comparisons to the state budget, but it should be noted as well. I represent small business, but an increase in the minimum wage increases the cost to all of our government as well. There are estimates that by the time this comes into full effect, there'll be an additional $500 million in labor costs just for government. But I'm here to represent Main Street, represent small business owners. And what the real problem is out there is there's a mismatch between the workforce and the jobs that are available. There's a lot of unusual things going on in our economy right now. And one of the most unusual is we have record high unemployment numbers, particularly at the outset of this crisis. And yet at the same time, we have a labor shortage. That was the primary prevailing condition of the small business economy as we went into the COVID crisis. The number one concern, the highest concern of small business owners was workforce availability. In the strangest way, that's still very persistent through this COVID and through all of this dislocation. A lot of businesses are struggling trying to hire workers. 23% of small business owners out there right now say they're going to create new jobs in the next quarter. 56% of small business owners have jobs that are available now. But here's the shocker. Of those that have jobs available, 80% of them say that they don't have qualified applicants available. And 30% of businesses that have jobs available say that they have persistent job openings that they cannot fill. That becomes a real difficulty for a small business owner because they've got to go back to that customer and say, listen, I'd love to sell you this good, this product, this service, but I can't deliver it to you. Now, there's something that's gonna fix that, and that's called wages increasing. And we are seeing that. Wages are increasing during this COVID crisis because business owners are reacting to this labor shortage and they're increasing wages.
Is there a reinvestment element to Amendment 2? In other words, if you pay people more, they will spend more. Talk about that.
Well, I think that's what, yes, there is absolutely an investment here in Amendment 2 in our state, in our communities. We've seen it from Disney workers. We've seen workers at Disney who have gone from $10 an hour to $14 an hour in the last 2.5 years, be able to find new modes of transportation, to be able to change their living situation. To be able to improve their overall quality of life. And that will happen here as well. This is about lifting up the boats, like a rising tide lifts all boats. That's what this is about. And voting for Amendment 2 is the right thing to do.
Let's talk about, Mr. Clinton, the idea that if this measure doesn't pass, are you hearing from the local workforce that they may move to states that do have either that current or escalating minimum wage getting up to $15 an hour?
I mean, certainly workers are always evaluating what their best options are. I think Florida provides world-class service, world-class hospitality. That's why we're the #1 travel destination prior to COVID. We're going to be the #1 travel destination afterward. And it's because of the hardworking hospitality workers across this state. If Florida is going to remain competitive, if states in the South and states around us, other tourism markets are going to pass laws like this, Florida is going to have to raise their wages to remain competitive. But it's not just about being competitive. It's also about the right thing to do. The United Way released a study called the Alice Report that says people making $9, $10, $11 an hour are not even able to do what they call surviving. I mean, as a society, as a community, I would hope that we would want all of our residents to do better than barely surviving.
I want to play you a clip, and we'd like to play a clip from a video from the group Save Florida Jobs, which is headed by the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association in opposition to Amendment 2. Take a listen.
Amendment 2 was to pass, I feel devastated. I would be devastated. I worry about it now. Like when I go home at night, just the thought of that, when I heard about it, it scares me. It scares that I'm not going to.
And Mr. Hurley, this amendment has been in the works for several years, but coronavirus has delivered that major hit to our economy. You mentioned this some. In Florida, please tell us how that's affected businesses big and small, and especially when you're talking about recovery before businesses will be able to afford some of these things again.
Well, it is true. The minimum wage has been around forever, and it'll be around much longer after this amendment passes or fails. As I said, we have a minimum wage in the Constitution already. We're afraid that will stifle the energetic growth that we're seeing right now in certain sectors. Now, I'm not going to candy coat it. There are certain industry sectors that have been devastated, and they're important sectors to Florida. The hospitality sector, that means hotels, restaurants, bars, taverns, and tourism, is still suffering mightily, and there's great dislocation in that. But there are certain sectors of the Florida small business economy that are flourishing. Manufacturing, for one, construction, other services are actually expanding right now. What we have in the Florida economy is not inadequate wages. We have a mismatch between the talents of the workforce today and the production needs of the economy. We're producing goods that are not consumable, and we're not able to produce the goods that the consumers are eager to buy right now. And that's going to be painful as the Florida economy adjusts. But we're not going to magically fix all the dislocation in our economy with the fiat of a constitutional amendment.
I'll give each of you 30 seconds for a closing statement, and Mr. Hurley, we'll begin with you.
Yeah, the National Federation of Independent Business represents over 10,000 small business owners in Florida. They're Main Street. They're the mom and pop businesses that you like to go to. We realize that we miss them. We miss them an awful lot when they get closed down. They're very concerned that if a $15 minimum wage in November is imposed upon them, all the challenges, all the efforts they've gone through all of 2020 to get their doors back open is going to be met with another huge obstacle. Please save Florida small businesses and vote no on Amendment 2.
Look, I think it's really important that Florida voters vote yes on Amendment 2. Florida workers need a raise. We saw what happened when Disney workers fought for it. Florida workers can do the same. I encourage all working men and women in the state of Florida to vote yes on Amendment 2.
Eric Clinton, president of Unite Here Local 737, and Bear Hurley of National Federation of Independent Business. Thank you both for joining us. You can check out more details about Amendment 2 on our website, WESH.com. Just click on Commitment 2020.